Hello there. I wanted to share some thoughts with you from Hebrews chapter 12. This came up in a discussion that I was actually having with my sister. And I particularly wanted to focus on Hebrews 12:15 and talk about this concept of being responsible for each other or not being responsible for each other. Is my brother in Christ, is my sister in Christ, are they my responsibility? Am I their responsibility? If they are failing or sinning or not showing the fruits of regeneration, is it my responsibility to say something to them? And to set a context, first of all, and that's always important, of course, we don't ever want to take verses out of context, but just the context of this chapter, Hebrews chapter 12, is completely and totally all about sanctification. First two verses are very well known. It starts out, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us. That phrase just sounds cool, doesn't it? Let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. He despised the shame, and he sat down at the right hand of God. Consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And so there's this great exhortation, essentially, to just, it's basically what it's saying is stop sinning. We have this great cloud of witnesses in chapter 11, and in view of everything that they are witnessing to us, everything that they are speaking to us, stop sinning. The only thing, if you've really been justified, then the only thing that makes sense is to be sanctified. And verse 4 is one of those verses that is super surprising, but he says, you've not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. That verse alone, just by itself, is kind of a shocker, just for the hyper grace culture that we live in, and that's for a whole nother video, for a whole nother time, what I mean by hyper grace. But the idea of here the apostle, whoever wrote Hebrews, is really being sarcastic and saying, you've not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood and you're striving against sin. Like you haven't got so serious about the sanctification thing that you've actually bled in order to accomplish it, which is precisely what he just got finished talking about in chapter 11 when he talked about people who experience mockings and scourgings and chains and imprisonments and being stoned and being sawn in two and being put to death with the sword. The whole point of all those people who were martyrs is they resisted the temptation to compromise, to be like the world. They resisted it to the point that they were killed for it, that they shed their blood. And he's the author of the Hebrews is writing to the recipient of the Hebrews and saying, you guys haven't done that. Like, basically he's saying, this is really sort of a sarcastic, almost mocking kind of a verse. He's saying, you guys, you think you're varsity, but you're just the C team, the C squad, or you're just playing T-ball. Not even in the big leagues yet. Or as one of my favorite pastors explained this, it's sort of like saying, why aren't you like your brother? Why can't you be more like your brother? The ones I just finished talking about in chapter 11 is really what he's saying. And then verses 5 through 11, we have one of the largest passages in the New Testament about the concept of discipline. And the whole point of discipline is when a justified person is not sanctified and there's still sin that easily entangles in their life. God is going to discipline us in order to get that out of our lives. The whole point is practical, lived out, daily holiness. And then in verse 14, he makes another shocking statement when he says, pursue sanctification, without which no one will see the Lord. What he's saying is a person whose justification never has any fruits, or as James liked to put it, a faith without works, is dead. James said it was dead. The author of the Hebrews said that person won't see the Lord. And so that's the context when we come to verse 15. This is all about sanctification. It's all about practical, lived out daily holiness in the life of the believer. And then in verse 15 he says, see to it And I'll come back to those words. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God. And so, let me just back up. The three English words, see to it, it comes from one Greek word. And it's a highly unusual construction. It's actually the Greek word episkopos. It's where we get words like Episcopalian. And typically in English it's translated overseer. It's almost always a noun in the New Testament. I could be wrong, but I think this is the only occurrence of it being in verbal form. But what he's really saying is it's your responsibility to oversee your brothers and sisters around you and to make sure that they haven't missed the grace of God. And again, the context is practical, lived out daily holiness. That's what the chapter is all about. And so when he says that I'm to oversee my brothers and sisters and to make sure that they haven't missed the grace of God, what he's really saying is we are to observe each other's lives, and that if a person does have the grace of God in their lives, it's going to have fruit. It's going to be manifested in the way that they walk. I mean, that's walk, run, the race that they're running. I mean, these are illustrative words that are coming right out of this chapter. Striving against sin. If all those things aren't present, then we have reason to believe that this person has missed the grace of God. If they're not working to fix their eyes on Jesus, if they're not running with endurance the race that is set before them, if they're not striving against sin. I mean, there's a concept that in the church culture where antinomianism is just absolutely prevalent. The idea of striving against sin immediately invokes accusations of legalism. Well, yes, we're to strive against sin. Now, there's a way you can strive against sin that is legalism, and it does lead to death. But not striving against sin also leads to death. That's the whole point of what he's saying right here in verse 14 and 15. So hopefully that's useful for somebody.